Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the second part of a conifer tour here from Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. We covered all the conifers in the front garden in that video if you want to go back and look at it. And now we're doing the conifers in the back garden. We have quite a collection here, down in the southern part of the southeast United States. Some of them were on this very southern border of where they'd be happy, and then some of these really like being in the south and don't have any problem with it. And I'm going to jump right into this Cryptomeria. That's one of those that has no problem being here in the south. This is a dwarf Cryptomeria. I think there was only one Cryptomeria in the front garden tour. I may be wrong. There'll be a couple in this back garden. No, there were two. I remember there were two in the first video. This is a dwarf. It's been a fantastic container plant. This is Cryptomeria japonica twinkle toes. You can see the beautiful new gold foliage coming out on it. This one will only grow 2-3 inches a year. We can probably in 10 years only have this thing be 2 foot round ball, something like that. So it can stay in this container as long as we want it to, or it can go in the ground later on, be a perfect little corner piece for a bed. Just great winter interest plant. A lot of these conifers do most of their growing during the winter months, during the cooler months of the year. These are hardy in zone 6 to 9. So again, Cryptomeria really thrive in the southeast United States, where other conifers kind of struggle with our heat and humidity. But this is a real standout, one of our favorite plants, and such a great name, twinkle toes. It kind of fits, what that plant is doing. Here's a neat little Thuja occidentalis. Again, these are native to the eastern United States, northeast and Canada. It's a little hot here in the southeast for them. Again, you see emerald arborvitae everywhere. You see lots and lots of Thuja occidentalis. This one's truly neat, interesting, and different than most of what you're going to see. This one's called Primo. Very fastigiate, upright growth habit. It can reach about 4 feet in height by about 1 foot in width over a very long period of time. Again, these conifers aren't going to stop growing, so it'll get taller than that. But they tend to slow down when they reach a size, when they get to their, what people are calling their full size, they tend to slow down a bit. But again, they'll blow through that size. This one is Hinoki-like. It looks like a dwarf Chamaecyparis, really, rather than a Thuja occidentalis. It has that, kind of layered look that obtusa nana gets, the little dwarf one that was in the first video out in the front garden. Look at this thing. It looks great. This would look great in some sort of rock garden container, like this one is a real standout. Any place where you need a little little narrow plant. Some of these can get a bit of a bronzing color to them in the wintertime. Here in the south, we're not going to get as much of that. It just doesn't get as cold. So this one stayed green for us throughout the winter. In the first video, we had a Thuja orientalis called Frankie Boy that had this similar look to it. This is actually a Thuja plicata, which is a western red cedar. Some people call them. They're not obviously they're not true cedars, but these Thuja plicatas, these western cedars, Green Giant is a Thuja plicata, tend to be a little more heat tolerant than Thuja occidentalis, the Primo that I showed you right before this. These tend to be more heat tolerant. This one not necessarily as much. This one's called Whipcord, a really interesting habit to this one. It'll get 4 to 5 feet by 4 to 5 feet. It's not in a big hurry, and we've got it in this little container, and it's just a real show off. You put this one somewhere where you want something with a loose, sweeping, informal habit. I've seen these listed for zones 5 to 7 and all the way from 3 to 9. I doubt it's as cold tolerant as 3. Maybe it is, and I doubt it's as heat tolerant as 9. Maybe it is, but I'm going to call it 5 to 7 for this video, maybe 5 to 8, and hold it at that. Again, I talked about this a lot in the first video if you haven't watched it, that we keep the roots shaded on most of these conifers. The tops of them really love the sunlight, and they'll do the thing they're going to do, the gold foliage, blue foliage, whatever it is, well in the sunlight, but they like the roots shaded. Some of the less heat tolerant ones we have out here are going into the shade in the afternoon, so we're judging it on that. But we're definitely keeping the roots shaded, keeping them cool on the bottom and hot on the top. Next up is another Chamaecyparis. We have a lot of them in the garden. They're all super different. So, you can get upright, narrow habits. You can get blue foliage on them. You can get gold foliage. They're all soft to the touch. This is Boulevard. Boulevard's an interesting one because it'll in about 10 years, it'll be 6 feet in height, something like that. We bought it in a very small container. It's been in this container for 2 years now. And, you know, it has this beautiful blue foliage on it. When these are in the ground for some period of time later, they'll actually open up some, and they have a very different look once they get to that 8, 9, 10 feet in height that they can in the landscape. But when they're smaller, they tend to be these little soft, very full plants with lots and lots of color on them, great container plants. Again, a very different plant out in the landscape once it's hardened off in the future. These are hardy in zones 4 to 8, so most people watching can grow these. Again, the roots are shaded down here in this container, and the top's up in a lot of sun. The sun doesn't get over to this side of the house until almost midday, but once it does, it's in some pretty intense sunlight for several hours. But it's just one of my absolute favorites, and all of these are just, you just want to, you want to touch them. But if you need a plant with some, this interesting blue foliage, it's just a standout. It looks great with all these other textured plants, but with different size leaves and different texture, different color foliages and that kind of thing. This is Picea pungens Glauca Globosa nana, which is a mouthful, right? We'll just call it dwarf Colorado spruce or Colorado blue spruce. That one has grown. It's been in the ground there for about 2 years, and it may have grown 2 or 3 inches at this point. There's a sedum trying to eat it. We've got to get that sedum back under control. That sedum just gets absolutely wild. That one's in a slightly moist space. It's elevated, so it's not sitting down in water, but its roots are cool. It's got other things growing around it. This one's definitely not one of the heat-tolerant conifers. This one's, you'll see it listed zones 2 to 8. I think when they're talking about zone 8 on these, they're probably talking about the Pacific Northwest, where it's not as humid and it's not as hot during the summer. That heat and humidity combo tends to not be great for these blue spruces here in the southeast. We'll see one here or there, but this one is about as healthy and happy as I'll see. And again, it's got the roots covered on it, so the roots are cool. It's getting some direct sun on it from maybe 11 in the morning until about 2:30 in the afternoon, and it's back in the shade, and it's very, very happy in this space. Again, it's going to grow 2 or 3 inches a year. Maybe reach 4 or 5 feet sometime way out in the future, but again, not in a hurry. And it's just an absolutely stunningly beautiful piece. Everybody that sees that thing wants to know what it is. Now I'm going to go from our most cold tolerant conifer in our garden over there with that blue spruce to our most heat tolerant conifer in the garden and the least cold tolerant, which is this Podocarpus. This one's called Roman candle. All the new growth on this thing is white. The December freeze, these are hardy in zone 8 to 10 or 8 to 11, and we're in zone 7B here in Raleigh, and that little winter cold we got did put a little bit of a dent in this, not too much. We know it's not the most cold tolerant thing in the garden, and so we've got it in a protected space over here by the house. So it took a little bit of damage, but not too much. Once the new growth starts on this, it's almost vivid white. Beautiful, beautiful plant. Like the other Podocarpus, it's got kind of an upright, narrow habit on it. Some of the other upright Podocarpus, like Mackie as an example, are pretty fast-growing plants. This one is definitely not in that category because of that gold foliage. It slows it down some, so it will eventually get tall. It's just going to get there a little bit slower than others. Great container choice. Beautiful plant. If you're in the south, if you're in zones 8 to 10, incredibly drought tolerant, beautiful conifer that's a standout in the garden. This is a Southern Living Plant Collection piece. Everything that was in the first video and so far in the second video is already in the ground, or it's living in a container or something. We have several things that we've gotten for this spring that are going to go in container videos later. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now, we're getting containers from Michael Carr Designs. There'll be a video for that. We actually went down to his place and looked at containers at his place, and he's sending us a few things. And so the new patio area out here in the back garden is going to have some interesting new containers going in it. So those videos will be coming soon. This Cryptomeria will be part of that. This is a Cryptomeria with no name. So we have a lot of Cryptomeria japonicas out here in the garden. This one has an incredibly tight, compact habit. We have several of these little dwarf Cryptomerias. They're amongst the more heat tolerant conifers for the southeast. Most people watching can grow these Cryptomeria. I think you're going to be 5 to 8, something, but zones 5 to 8, something like that. But look at the compact habit that this one has. We have dragon prints, which is also compact, but this one's even more compact than that, with a low doming habit. These are very drought tolerant once they're established. We're going to put it in a container. But I love the habit of this one. All these Cryptomeria are pretty much soft to the touch as well. Next up is another Southern Living Plant Collection piece. This is Fire Chief Arborvitae, and I talk frequently about these Thuja occidentalis not necessarily being the most heat tolerant plants. This one was actually selected for its heat tolerance. And this one is like a chameleon. So right now you see it coming out of winter with mostly a green hue to it. The new growth on it is kind of a gold color. And as it ages during the summer, it becomes kind of an orangey color. So it's a constantly changing. That's why it's called Fire Chief. It looks like it's on fire during the summertime. Just the outside of the plant is like an orange glow to it. These are hardy in zones 5 to 8, probably a little more cold hardy than that, honestly. But great, great plants. These, I've seen them in the landscape as tall as 4 feet in height and maybe 5 feet in width. I think you'll see on the tags more like 3 to 4 by 3 to 4, something like that. They can be sheared off whenever you want to shear them off and reset them a bit. Very, very soft to the touch, very, very easy plant in the landscape, and it'll, again, add some interesting color changes to your garden throughout the season. This is how we actually prefer to buy our conifers. A lot of the conifers that we have in this garden are ultimately going to get bigger than the spaces we're putting them in, and I'd like to start as small as possible and watch them grow over time. And so we try to find these little quart pots, gallon pots, if we have to. And I just showed you a couple 3-gallon things that's just the size they were in, but I would prefer to buy them much smaller and watch them grow, because we can use something like this in a container, and then we can put it into the ground, and then we can use it for several years in several different ways before it outgrows our very small urban lot here in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is a Chamaecyparis obtusa called Melody, and all the Chamaecyparis obtusa I've shown in these 2 sets of videos are all very, very different growth habits, all really very interesting individual plants on their own, and again, but all are soft to the touch. This one has this kind of gold hue to it. It will pick up some reddish tones in the winter, probably more so up in zone 5. These are hardy in zone 5 to 8. Typically, if we're talking about winter coloration or winter changes on conifers, that's mostly in more northern areas here in the south. We don't get quite cold enough to necessarily trigger some of the bronzing and other things that happen on some conifers. We do some winters, and it'll pick up a little more in some winters than others. This one has a very slow growth rate, 3 to 6 inches a year, something like that. It's really upright and narrow in this container, but it'll broaden with age. And so as it gets more towards 6 feet, it'll actually broaden out as it goes and probably end up about 4 feet in width, something like that. But really neat little conifer that we can put at a little upright piece in a small container and then move it to a slightly larger container in the future. And again, it can be popped into the ground and used a lot of different ways over a long period of time. I said all that and forgot to tell you the variety name on this one is actually Melody. Here's another Chamaecyparis obtusa called Kanaami hiba, and again, I'm going to butcher that name. Another one that's really, really soft to the touch. Another one that'll be slightly slower growing here in the south. Beautiful gold foliage, a slightly taller, kind of pyramidal shaped conifer. We'll say it'll reach 3 to 4 feet in height, maybe 2 to 3 feet in width. Again, there's nothing to really stop these plants from growing. It's not like they read the tag or stop right when they reach a certain height, but it's definitely maintainable at that. This one could easily be sheared whenever you want to shear it. I think I said it's hardy in zone 4 to 8 already. We keep the roots cool on these. That seems to really, really help the summer stress, is having some sort of annuals planted around them. This one's going to go into a container, and it'll have other smaller growing annuals or ground covers or something that spills over the container, keeping the roots cool and the tops warm. This one is going to need some direct sun. If you're dealing with these gold conifers, they need a little bit of that direct sun, but here in the south, we have to watch that a little bit. So we'll have it in a little bit of afternoon shade or late afternoon shade, but we got to get some direct sun on it to keep this gold foliage. Otherwise, it'll just be a green ball. Next up is another Podocarpus, and this is the same as the Roman candle over there that had the white foliage. It had a little bit of burn on it this winter. These are hardy in 7B to 10. And so it's got, had just a little bit of burn you can see on it. It's not really that big of a deal. This one's called Mood Ring because it's always showing off cool color. So it's got this pinkish new growth that'll be bronzish and all kinds of different colors as it starts to grow. Where again, right here in the middle of April, we had a couple frosts maybe 3 weeks ago that's kind of slowed the growth down on this really southern heat tolerant conifer, but the new growth is starting now. And if we shot this again in 3 or 4 weeks, it would be absolutely brightly colored. And there, you would realize why it's called Mood Ring. Great upright, narrow habit on this one. This one can get probably 15 feet in height, but it's only gonna get 4 or 5 feet in width. And it's perfect for us. We got this mixed border screen over here, and we're looking for tall, narrow things. And this Podocarpus definitely fits that. And this Mood Ring is really an interesting cultivar of Podocarpus. This is a Chamaecyparis obtusa called Thuja. It is a more narrow, upright selection of hinoki. So we had a dwarf hinoki out in the front garden in the first video, and it doesn't get broad. It's definitely still upright and narrow, but this one stays really, really narrow. Like in 10 years, it could be 5 to 6 feet in height, but only be about 2 feet in width. Maybe only grows about 4 to 6 inches a year, something like that. Zones 5 to 8, really neat little upright narrow conifer. Again, it's got a little bit of that browning in the bottom of it that we'd expect to see in conifers this time of the year. The new growth will come in, fill out around it, and it'll disappear pretty quickly to spring. This is another Chamaecyparis obtusa or fault cypress. Again, all of these are pretty soft to the touch. This one is called Fernspray Gold. This one in the south needs a little bit of shade. For sure. So we've got it where the building here is shading it in the afternoon, and it was really just in this container for the winter. We had some violas in here. It's about to be replanted. Here we are in April. This one's just going to move to another container. Again, it'll turn a little bit orangey in the winter time, and then it's starting to pick up that gold color again. This one can reach about 6 feet in height, about 4 feet in width, has kind of a little bit of a weeping habit as it gets larger, and you can see that even in this young growth. Again, hardy in zones 5 to 8, which is pretty typical of most of these fault cypress. We're going to finish up this second video with this Cedrus deodara Feelin blue. We showed Cedrus atlantica out in the front garden. There's only actually 4 species of cedar. We call all kinds of things cedar, though. We call Juniperus virginiana eastern red cedar. We call Thuja plicata western red cedar. We call all kinds of things cedars, but there's only actually a few. And this is the dwarfest version of the deodar cedar. There are deodar cedars in our neighborhood, the regular deodar cedars that are approaching 75 foot plus in height and have these just incredible, massive trees that they become. This one can be trained in almost anything you want it. It doesn't form a natural leader, so it actually grows as a ground cover typically, but you will see these trained with a central leader where they'll just take a piece and stake it straight up so that it can be grown taller. You'll see these shaped into tunnels. You'll see them sometimes as tall as 6 or 8 feet, and then they're always going to be wider than they are tall. But if you just leave it be when you get it and it hasn't been staked up, it's going to act more like a ground cover and get probably no more than just a few feet tall and about as wide as you want to let it get. It can be all of these conifers can be shaped a little bit in the late winter if you need to. Most of them keep a pretty good form on their own without having to do that a whole lot. This one might run a little limb out too far here or there. Great plant. These are hardy in zones 6 to 9, and just a really easy plant that all the new growth on it has this bluish hue. That's the reason it's called Feelin blue. And I really like this one. I like things that are, just misshapen, and we wouldn't find 2 of these that looked alike anywhere, which is another thing that I'm kind of drawn to in some plants, that they're not all just little meatballs, little cutout meatballs. So there you go. I think between the 2 videos, I don't know how many this is, it's more than 25 conifers out here, and I think we've probably missed a few because every time we've walked around and talked about it, we found a couple more. And so after this video is complete, I'm going to find at least a couple more. But if you're following along with the channel, you can see some of those in the landscape and see how they're performing during the year. Again, we're on the southern edge of a lot of these where it's almost too hot and humid for them, and we're on the northern edge of the Podocarpus and a couple of other things where it's almost too cold for them. Just an interesting little pocket we're in where we can try them all, and that's what we're doing. So thank you guys for following along. What's your favorite conifer, either from our collection or yours?